as long as you live up to the policies you put forward and what you want to do as a leader, that should be paramount. And that's the way we planned it out. The fact is, my decision to run in a party primary is a product of this dysfunctional duopoly, because the reality is, in a place like New York City, if you didn't run in the Democratic primary, you're probably setting yourself up to lose. And that's the kind of thing we should change. You should have open primaries and ranked choice voting here in New York City, and then candidates wouldn't be making, frankly, very calculating decisions.
That's really what I want to focus in on, because the Forward Party seems to really, I mean, more than anything, yes, there's other things that are involved, like you mentioned, universal basic income or even Medicare for all or things like this, but it's really about this open primary and ranked choice voting. So how do you propose that you're going to go about getting this done? Because you've got to do it state by state. What is it, maybe 25 states right now that have ballot initiatives? That's how you can change it in those particular states. But what about the other states? I mean, how do you propose you're going to go about doing this on a state-by-state basis?
This is why it's so promising, Kim, because if you look at our Constitution, there's nothing about political parties. We're essentially living the worst nightmare of our founding fathers come to life. The duopoly, it was John Adams, I think he called it a great evil. And it was before it even happened in 1780. So the fact that this is all controlled at the state level is actually tremendously positive, because one state has already passed a ballot initiative to convert to open primaries and ranked choice voting, Alaska. There are 24 other states, as you just said, Kim, that we can do the same thing. So this is why, if enough of us get together, we can make this happen for real at the state level, as opposed to, frankly, bashing our head against a wall in Congress and waiting for them to fix the machine. That is providing incentives that are making it so that they get rewarded for keeping issues around rather than solving problems and resolving them.
Can you explain to people why ranked choice voting and open primaries are so essential to changing the system and depolarizing the nation?
Right now, Congress has an approval rating of 28%, very low, but the re-election rate for individual members is 92%, sky high. So why is that? The reason is that 83% of our districts are either very blue or very red. And so the entire game is not to try and appeal to the general voter, but it's to placate and please the 10 to 20% most extreme voters on either side. So if you switch to open primaries and ranked choice voting, overnight, our legislators would become much more reasonable and prone to compromise, because then they'd have to make a case to 51% of voters as opposed to the most extreme flanks. So this is the incentive change that could pull us back from the brink, reduce polarization, and make it so that our representatives actually represent the vast majority of us instead of people that don't represent the mainstream point of view.
You know, Andrew,
sounds great, doesn't it? Let's do it.
Yeah,
Let's do it.
So.
Malik, you know, I absolutely agree with you that Trump is not going to suffer some kind of criminal consequence for what happened, and you know, the idea that jail time is just around the corner is an absurd kind of resistance media narrative. And you're right that there's no connection or overlap in that kind of formal collusion sort of way. However, I do, obviously, we did watch with horror what happened, and the people there on January 6th were clearly there at Trump's behest. I think received moral support from Trump and from his rhetoric. So, and the party has not really, do you think the party has sufficiently distanced itself from Trump in response to that? I really don't think it has.
Yeah, so I actually think that it has. When it comes to, if you see many of the members in Congress, I think what typically happens is that the media typically chooses 1, 2, or 3 people, 4 people, 5 people to say that the party hasn't really condemned this. We've seen on really at every level, from me and my small platform here, but even all the way up to Mitch McConnell and others, the party itself has distanced itself from this and have condemned it. But I think the conversation that's had in the media, when you pick those 1 or 2 Republicans who are out there really pushing these narratives, whether there is someone like a Marjorie Taylor Greene and some of those people that have been not very helpful when it comes to moving us forward, I think that the media focuses on those in a way that doesn't ultimately help the Republicans Republican Party, but I do push back on the idea that the party itself hasn't pushed back on this, because for many of us, we're actually hoping that it moves forward. But I think on the Democratic side, I think what Democrats are hoping is that this is something that pushes all the way up until next year, until the midterms, so they can continue to use this against Republicans because of the same thing, saying that Republicans haven't taken this seriously. I think that for someone who has actually watched all of the hearings that preceded the Select Committee, I think that the information that we got from those hearings, it was a voluminous amount of information that we got from those hearings. And so I really don't expect us to get much from the congressional hearings, from the Select Committee, but I imagine that they will continue to charge on and try to really do more so a thing of embarrassing Donald Trump than finding out there was some type of collusion or coordination, not just from Trump world, but even, as Jennifer mentioned, the idea that there were members of Congress who are also involved in this. I don't think that it's going to be a lot of there, but we'll see what happens.
The reason I think this is still important, and I want to get your take on this, is that Anthony Fauci is known to be a very strong supporter of gain-of-function research. He's publicly been on the record for it for many, many years. We know that he advocated for lifting the ban on it, internally. And so it raises the question of whether his attitude towards gain-of-function research was creating a permissive attitude that allowed grantees of the NIH to say, okay, yeah, there's a ban. Okay, we understand that. But Tony's with us. Dr. Fauci's with us. Like, we can try this. Let's just make sure we're careful and don't blow anything up. And so, if I do think we have to figure out how the safeguards fell away here, so that in the future, if as a public we decide that we don't want to do this research, that we can actually implement that policy, because policy making isn't just about designing a policy, it's also making sure that policy is implemented.
It does seem like, with regard to gain of function, there were capital R rules and then there were lowercase r rules, to your point, right? It was this idea that, yeah, it's banned. But again, we've seen Anthony Fauci defend, gain of function research, in the Senate, but outside of it as well. He was a very big proponent of it. And I think his defensiveness here is also worth talking about. Again, he was so arrogant and dismissive that anything could be wrong here. There was no sort of humility that, it's possible, right? He never even admitted that it was possible that some grantees were doing this, or maybe they turned things in late, or maybe that, there wasn't sort of competent oversight here. That was never even a possibility in his mind, which should concern everybody. Because again, I disagree with Andrew here in that I do think it's a topic worth pursuing, because if we look at the origins of COVID, even take the lab leak out of it, it was always that somehow a virus hopped from animal to human. Well, in that process, whether it occurred naturally or was, synthetic, that's gain of function. And if we ever find ourselves, God forbid, in a pandemic situation like this again, we need to know exactly where, the dominoes are falling with regard to what we are actually funding, even if we had nothing to do with it. Because again, this isn't just like, some basic, biomedical research that anybody can conduct anywhere. This is supercharging viruses to make them potentially deadly and unable to control. So this, at a minimum, we should be doing an overhaul of the NIH to see what else is going on, what else is in the archives, what else wasn't reported. And frankly, I do not think Anthony Fauci is the person that should be running this program for all of the reasons that we've laid out. And I think also, frankly, he owes Congress an apology.
Yeah, I mean, it has to matter, right? Whether this millions of people are dead either because of a freak sort of occurrence in nature that is deeply regrettable, but it just kind of happened, or maybe because of deliberate or incidental action by human beings that possibly was funded by our own government. Like, that's a massive difference.